sinners, and saints. Dust off those horns and halos. It's time for Alan After Dark.
My name is Alan, and I suck dick.
What?
Oh my God.
I'm sorry, what?
I don't think that comes as a surprise to most people, but apparently I need to say that out loud just to make sure that people understand. I guess you could say I'm frustrated this week, once again, about perception versus reality. Who I really am versus who you perceive me to be. What I'm getting at is that I feel like if you're a person like me who tries to have a good time whenever I go out, who wants to be on the wild side of life, I hate the feeling that people look at me as if I'm trash just because I might have an aggressive style. That's not really the right word to use in this situation, but what I mean is I am a very active pursuer of sexual encounters with people that I find attractive. Not as much as I used to be, but why is it that society in general turns their nose up at people who have an active sex life? Granted, active sex life could be defined many different ways, but does that stem from some sort of morality that people have, even people in the gay community themselves? Or is it really just jealousy? Jealous of people who do have a very active sex life. And don't get me wrong, I don't think there's anything wrong with not having an active sex life. If you don't have sex, what's wrong with that? There's no judgment there either, even though I guess we do mock people, I guess also on that side of the fence, which really isn't fair, is it? I mean, it shouldn't be anybody's business. We shouldn't care about anybody's sexual life unless it affects us directly, unless, we're in it. But it really does feel like some people don't want others to have fun, to enjoy life. And I do think that part of that does stem from jealousy. If we are conforming to a society that should not have rules written in stone about how you should live your life, why would you want to judge people for living the life the way they do? I am frustrated, I guess you can tell, that you can be criticized just for being who you are. I wonder sometimes, they always talk about, especially in the 80s and 90s, Madonna, that she used sex to become so popular. There's no denying that sexuality is absolutely part of her career in pop music, in videos, in movies, and so on. But I think people view others who are expressing sexuality with contempt sometimes. I don't think she was taken seriously as a businesswoman, as an intelligent person, even though in interviews you could clearly tell that she had a really good head on her shoulders. She was very intelligent. And I think that's what's happened with this podcast. Because I talk a lot about sex and my sexual adventures, I'm not taken seriously, or I'm viewed with contempt, that perhaps I am harming our community by being so frank about sex. Personally, even though nobody really asked me, I think that I'm the podcast equivalent to punk rock, the rebel, the attitude, the fingers to authority. But deep down, the only intention I have is just to express myself, to talk about any subject I want to, or just babble like I normally do. A lot of you get a kick out of it, which I'm grateful for that. I hope I am a thought-provoking person, at least. Or if not, I hope that you're all at least getting a chuckle out of the show. Because at the end of the day, what's the point of listening to me for 20 minutes a week if I'm not going to make you laugh or make you think hard about something that you haven't considered before? For me, growing up in the Bible Belt in the South, Of course, I was in the closet. You didn't have much choice back in the day because you were at significant risk of being hurt, physically harmed, and abandoned. If a family had a gay child, 9 times out of 10, that child would be thrown out of the house, ostracized from the family, from the community, from everyone. So a lot of us my age, we lived a very restrained and restricted life. We were very careful. We were cautious about what we would do. We wouldn't open up to people. You kept it a secret, closely held to your chest. You just kept the secret to yourself. And when I discovered the gay clubs and realized there were a whole bunch of gay people, not just me, as I had thought and feared for many, many years, that opened up that whole world to me. So if you've been repressed in your sexual identity, especially the part of the actual physical act, then when you get the chance and you feel that freedom, you are going to cut loose in most cases. I'm not going to say that everybody does, but I sure did, and I sure wanted to. Not at first exactly, though. I've said it before, and I'll say it here again tonight. I had this sort of dream that I would fall in love with my best friend, and we would get married and live happily ever after and create our own wonderful world where everyone was safe and there was no bullying and no homophobia, no bigotry. And I thought that that was a real possibility. Then the real world punched me in the face, and I realized that it's a lot harder than I thought. It's a lot more complicated than I thought. But when I come through that phase of my experience, I did want to really dive in and have an active sex life. I really wanted to hook up and have one-night stands and fulfill that fantasy, that drive, especially since I was never that attractive growing up. And it seemed like a lot of guys in the gay community where I'm from, they did find me attractive. And that was the whole new world too. When you're used to being the ugly duckling and looking like Beaver Cleaver or looking like Carrot Top, and then some people look at you like you're Rob Lowe or David Cassidy or who, I don't know. Then you want to experience that. You want to have that physical worshiping of your body, so to speak. And it gave me a sense of pride, for the lack of a better word, that guys did view me in a sexual way. But none of that takes away from my intelligence, my hard work, my friendships, my relationships. I don't see how we feel the need to denigrate people who are very sexual and very sexually active. I totally understand we have to recognize that there are sexually transmitted diseases. One that was in the 80s and 90s invariably fatal, but now is more of a chronic condition that can be treated. But aside from that, why do so many people have hang-ups about people who are very sexually active? Now, women are targeted even worse. Women are treated like sluts and whores if they have the audacity to enjoy sex and indulge in it as much as they can. Whereas men, of course, are treated like heroes for all their conquests. Well, heteros are. Gay men, I guess it's the same either way. If you're a bottom bitch, you're a slut. If you're a top, you're a man's man, or some kind of bullshit like that. But it really does make me look at these paradigms that society has established that we really do need to break down. And isn't it funny how some of the most successful people in the world, politicians and celebrities and athletes, back in the day, meaning back in the 80s and 90s, how many times was it that it was a sex scandal that brought them down? Nothing to do with their abilities or anything like that, but it would almost always be some sort of sex scandal that destroyed careers. And if you think about that, you would think, well, why? Because it was made public? Is that it? Because you all know that there are people that get freaky with it that you would have never guessed got freaky with it behind closed doors. You know it. Now, granted, if you are a televangelist or some kind of religious person and you're bashing people for being sexually active, calling it a sin, and then you get busted doing it, of course you're going to get exposed and treated and like a criminal and ostracized because you're a fucking hypocrite. And you should be called out for things like that. You absolutely should. What gave you the right? But then again, we all know the old saying, those who scream the loudest are the most guilty. Look at how many men, especially the evangelicals, that bash gay people, and they'll get caught sucking dick through a glory hole in some adult sex store.
Yee-haw!
But in all these cases, why should that take away from a person's knowledge, experience? The idea that somehow a person that is very sexually active is only driven by that. That's what I'm getting at here. It's like, do you think that because someone is very sexual and talks about it a lot, has nothing to say about anything else? It really is a form of demonization, isn't it? It's a way to try to impose some sort of biblical morality on people. You know, that's what they would use when the right wing fought against marriage equality, when they fought against just getting rid of sodomy laws. They would argue that with marriage, same-sex marriage, who's to say that people won't start marrying animals or trees? We just had to laugh because you had to calmly explain to them that marriage is between consenting adults and animals can't consent. It's that simple on that. And so when those things wouldn't work, they'll start wanting to marry children, like 8-year-olds or 9-year-olds. Anything that they could think of that they thought would scare people is what they would use. And I believe in creating that stigma, it does affect how people who are very sexual, how they are looked at, viewed upon by society. And it just seems like really a ridiculous thing, doesn't it? I mean, to me it does. I know there's some that don't like sex, but one of my first episodes of this podcast, I talked about how great it was to masturbate and how that feeling, there was no other feeling like that. The euphoria of an orgasm. Why shouldn't you enjoy that? Why can't we? That nature provided us with this great sensation and you're supposed to feel guilty about enjoying it? It's always been something of a predicament for me, especially when I think about where I was in my thinking as a teenager, wanting to do all these things, wanting to be sexual, and not being able to out of fear for my own safety, my own survival. And then when I could, going just hog wild. I was safe. I wasn't a person who, they want to describe people that are sexual as reckless, and they used HIV/AIDS to try to convince people that they were right, that sex was immoral, and it led to diseases that could kill you. And they wanted to use that as a justification. But if you understood the basics of science and health and followed the instructions and the knowledge that was provided, you knew what safe sex was, and you could have enjoyable safe sex all the time, as much as your body would allow. I do feel somewhat bad for people that maybe aren't fulfilling that part of their life, that they may be missing out. And there are some that aren't missing out. You know, for as good as sex can be, it can be bad as well. It can be dreadful sometimes. But you always got your own hands, and you've got toys and things, and you can watch videos, pornographic films, and there are some hot stars that are in these adult films that I enjoy very much. And of course, I believe that all sexual experiences are to be with consenting adults. Of course. If they're not consenting, then you're committing a crime, and that is a no-go. And if you commit that crime, you will be punished. But don't lump everybody that likes sex into that same category. Honestly, I've watched a lot of porn in my life. And there's some that, that are, we'll call it amateur, which is fine. I don't know. I mean, it's just in the style that it's made. And I've seen, the terminology, gangbang and things like that. And I think a lot of those guys, I think many of them, they are fulfilling a fantasy of theirs. And I don't see anything wrong with that myself. But maybe my evolving in this subject is because of what I've experienced through my life, what I've seen and what I know. And it's tough to be yourself, isn't it? But when you stop worrying about what people think, they're going to think it anyway, and you let that go, you feel so much freer to live your life. If the worst they can do is call you a slut or a whore, big whoop, good God. I always say you're all just jealous. I have to admit for myself that I am not as wild as I used to be, but I won't let that stop me. If I find someone who I'm attracted to, we have chemistry, we want to suck dick, let's do it. I have no problem in expressing myself physically if the time is right. But I gotta confess too, I know there are some people who have only been with one person their whole life, but they're truly in love with that person. And I think that is just magnificent. I think that is a wonderful, joyous thing. And I wish those people every happiness. Sometimes I wish that had been my life, but it's not my life. And I am extremely happy with the life that I live. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Alan After Dark. I hope you've had fun, have been entertained, and maybe even a little horny. God knows I am, but, big surprise there, huh? Remember, take life by the balls and be real. We'll see you soon.